Hi everyone, Claire here and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'll be showing you how to draw this gorgeous little frog using coloured pencils. I'll be walking you through my process and along the way I'll be sharing plenty of tips on how to create that glossy, slightly slimy and wonderfully bumpy texture that gives frogs their unique look. This is a short time-lapse tutorial, but as always you can find the full real-time version on my Patreon channel. So get yourself comfy and let's get started. So just like usual, I'm starting with the eye on this chap, and this is a nice sized eye to work with so we can cram lots of different colours and textures into the centre of that eyeball. So I'm starting with my black pencil to outline the edge and then blocking in the centre with quite a firm pressure of black just to block in the really dark shapes. And then I'm applying some violet grey and some silver grey to block in the lighter parts of the reflections. So the pencils I'm using for this drawing are the Faber-Castell Polychromos and the Caran d'Ache Luminance. They both work really well together. The Caran d'Ache Luminance are great for blending and they also have a really great colour range. So both those two things are great for this frog's textures and colours, and the Faber-Castell are really great for detail. So back to the eye, and I'm slowly moving outwards from the eyeball. So I'm blocking in the main colours that I see, so we've got some really nice minty green tones in there, and then we're starting to introduce some of those warm golden tones. And then I'm upping the contrast a little by applying a little bit more pressure of some browns and starting to introduce some light pressures of some greens to blend into those colours. Here I'm using the Polychromos Dark Cadmium Yellow, which I find is a really great pencil to use with a little bit of pressure to add a bit of a golden tone over the top of those underlying layers. I always have a sharp black Polychromos pencil quite close by so that I can amplify some of the contrast and sharpen up some of the edges. It may be quite surprising, but this drawing doesn't contain that many greens. I'm only using a few green pencils, and generally I'm mixing the greens with other colours as well. But one of my favourite colours of green is the olive yellow Caran d'Ache Luminance pencil. This is a really great colour, it's great for blending, and it's a perfect colour which has got just a subtle amount of yellow tone to it, which is perfect for the brighter parts of this frog. So I'm starting to work on the skin texture now, and this is where I'm going to introduce more of those greens. The first thing that I'm doing is applying a base layer of a silver grey, which is going to act as the reflective parts, those really shiny parts of the skin. And then from there I'm building up some of my chosen greens into that reflective part. I'm also introducing some circular motion to my pencil strokes, which is going to help to bring out some of the texture of the skin as well. It's almost got a dappled effect to it, so applying circles in varying pressures is going to help with that texture. For this nose I'm starting to block out the most prominent shapes that I see, and then I'm applying a light pressure base layer of middle verdigris. This is a Caran d'Ache Luminance pencil which I absolutely love. It's kind of a minty green and it's perfect for those slightly lighter tones. And then for the tip on the end of the mouth I'm starting to introduce some warmer, browner golden tones. So again I'm applying small circles, just very gently increasing my pressure, starting with a soft pressure so that I can blend this into that middle verdigris colour. And then as I move away from the tip of the mouth I'm reintroducing some greens, again small circles and really light pressure to blend that transition of colour together. And then just going back over with more layers, slowly building up the contrast and the richness of the colour through building up those layers. So now I'm going over my mid-tone shadows, increasing the pressure ever so slightly so that the green appears nice and rich. And then with a slightly dark pencil, this is the olive green yellowish Polychromos colour, which is another favourite colour, and then applying a firmer pressure with small circles before going over with a brighter green to amplify that contrast. So for this next section I started by blocking in the most prominent black spots on the frog. These acted as a bit of a guideline, helping me stay within the shape that gradually emerged as I worked. They also served as anchor points, so it made it easier to judge where the surrounding shadows would fall, and basically helps to give a clearer sense of the frog's overall form. And then from that space that is left, I started to apply some colour. So I'm starting with the most prominent colour that I see, which is green. I always like to start with a really bright prominent colour when filling in a space, because this again acts as an anchor point to help keep you grounded and prevent you from feeling a little lost, so to speak. So after the green, I've blocked in a little brown, and then I'm going in with my violet grey luminance pencil to block in the most prominent shadows. I'm starting with a light pressure to begin with, just to block in the actual placement of the shadows, and then I'm gradually increasing the pressure and also increasing the layers as well, just going over, slightly overlapping the edges so we get a soft transition. And then shifted my attention to those lighter areas and just applying a little olive yellow 10% to add a little colour. So now that I've got all the main colours and shapes blocked in, I'm now going in to amplify the contrast and the richness of the colour. So I'm starting with some dark sepia, and again using a really light pressure and some small circles, gradually increasing the layers until I get to the level of contrast that I'm looking for, and then doing exactly the same with the other colours. And then a really important thing to do towards the end, but also really fun because you instantly see a pop of difference, is go over with the black polychromos pencil to increase that contrast. Here I'm just completing this final segment of the face before I move on to the back. And this is where the first little bumps start to appear, so it's important to carefully observe the light source so that we can amplify the highlights and carefully place those shadows so that they look properly raised from the skin. Moving on to the reflective shiny part of the back, I'm starting by blocking out the most prominent shapes. Just like I mentioned earlier, they help us to keep on track. And then I'm applying a light base layer of small grey circles. I'm slowly adding some other colours, still in the form of small light pressured circles, starting with a few greys and then introducing some greens. I've got some olive green yellowish in there, and then some brighter greens. I'm keeping my pressure really light, and I'm also making sure that my pencil is fairly bluntish. I don't want any sharp defined edges, I want it to look quite soft and out of focus. And then for the lower part of the back, which is not being hit by the light, I'm amplifying the colour, making it richer, so I'm using a firmer pressure. And because this area is in shadow, some of those raised little bumps which just catch the light, we need to make sure that these are amplified. So it's important to make sure that we've got some nice tight highlights, which again needs to be complemented with those deeper shadows. Just some small semicircles at the opposite side to the highlight. And you can see from here that I'm using my electric eraser to very gently dab those tiny bumps to pull out those highlights. Moving further down the body to the next segment, starting by blocking off those prominent shapes and then blocking in the most prominent colours, starting with a light pressure, gradually increasing the pressure, and also using light pressure circles to join to the area above. As you can see, I'm starting the main part of the belly in much the same way by blocking out those black shapes. This next area is where we really start to see those classic frog bumps, and I'll try to explain my technique as clearly as possible. So my approach is to block out the main lines that separate the clusters of bumps, because they do appear to have those distinct lines between each segment. And then between those lines I draw circles to act as the outline of each bump. Then I return to those initial lines and I use them as guides to push both upwards and downwards, creating individual shadows around each bump. So now that I have the structure of the bumps in place, I can then concentrate on the colour and the tone. So I'm going back in with my slightly brighter green to richen up the greens, and then going back in with a darker green. This is the olive green yellowish, and just making those bumps a little bit more apparent, but also focusing on the actual shadows that are cast by the bumps. Then, by holding the eraser at a 45-degree angle on a spare sheet of paper, we can carve a point on the tip. This is especially useful for pulling out small rounded marks on a drawing, perfect for those highlights of the frog's bumps. And we don't want to leave those highlights as they are. The edges need tidying up and crisping with a sharp point, and you may also want to dampen the tone slightly as well. If you have a heavy hand with the electric eraser, you may take the highlights all the way down to the white of the paper, which can make them appear a little bit too bright. In that case, gently shade over the area with a light coloured pencil, just to tint the overall highlight back with a soft touch of colour. Moving on to the legs now, and starting with the same process of blocking in those black shapes. I'm blocking in the most prominent colours that I see, so using some olive yellow as well as some browns and some peachy tones. I'm applying a medium pressure and small circles, so while I'm applying the pencil to the paper, I'm also starting to build up some of the texture. And then, just like I did for the top of the back, I'm applying some silver grey to act as that shiny, glossy, almost wet look. And then applying some subtle shadows with a light pressure of a darker grey. Again, applying small circles and using the bluntness of the pencil. I'm then refining my blacks using a sharp black polychromos pencil and a firmer pressure to deepen the richness and boost the contrast. Sometimes when you apply black first and then layer light colours close by, a bit of that pigment can smudge onto the black and dull it slightly, so that's why it's always a good practice to revisit your blacks later on and just freshen them up. And just like I've done with the blacks, I'm now doing the same with the coloured parts of this leg. So I'm applying a little bit more pressure, layering over colours I've previously done, and basically just giving them a little boost. I'm introducing more browns and golden tones here to boost the overall warmth of these legs. I'm just pulling out a few highlights with the electric eraser, using the same pointed tip technique that I used earlier. And then I went back in with some of the darker coloured pencils to draw around those highlights, just to give them a little boost and make them more apparent. And then for the really shadowed part of the belly, I started by applying a base layer of brown, mixing a few greens in there, and then gradually increased my layers of pencil, gradually moving towards the dark sepia to darken them to the point where I was happy with the contrast of that shadow. And then a little bit more boosting of the contrast and refining before moving on to the next section. For the arms, the process is very similar but also slightly different as well. It does have a little bit of a different texture to those arms, almost a dappled effect, especially on the arm on the left, which is in sunlight. But I started with the same process as before, blocking out those dark shapes. And then when it came to applying the colour, I started with the lightest parts first. So I applied some light peaches and some light greens, and then gradually increase the pressures and introduce some richer browns in there as well, just to boost the overall contrast and the richness of the colour. And here I'm using the green ochre Caran d'Ache luminance pencil. It's one of those really stunning, highly pigmented pencils, which is great for boosting those rich, warm colours. And then adding a touch of steel grey here to boost some of those cooler shadows, and then just applying a little bit more contrast, again boosting the blacks and richening up the colours. This is one of those areas where the shadows are really deep, so I want to make sure that they are dark enough in comparison to the lighter areas, and that's going to help to give the arms some more depth. I want to make the frog appear grounded, so I'm just adding a little bit of water just below the feet and some shadowing as well. And then I'm just repeating the same process for the other arm. Here I'm using the side of my electric eraser tip to pull out some of those lines that lie within the water or the slime on the feet. It's one of those important areas for the highlights to make the water look wet. And then, as always, when I've used the electric eraser, I always go in with a sharper pencil to tidy up those edges. And then, apart from a little shadow work and some refining and tidying up, I think this frog is just about finished. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It's one of those subjects which has been an absolute delight to draw, and if you'd like to follow along to the full real-time tutorial where I cover absolutely everything from start to finish, walking you through the whole process, fully narrated, all in real time, you can find this over on my Patreon channel. The link is in the description. So thank you again so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you on the next video.